Do you love women authors who write with humor and irony, who criticize their society in a satirical, tongue-in-cheek kind of way? Do you like a good literary mystery? Let me introduce you to the elusive Ephelia. And yes, that's Ephelia with an E, not Hamlet's Ophelia with an O. Ephelia was a 17th-century poet and playwright whose identity has puzzled historians and scholars for centuries. She continues to intrigue us. Why? Because her work offers us a unique view into gender and power dynamics in the Restoration period. She didn't shy away from talking about sex, men, and politics, as you will soon see. But who was the woman behind the pseudonym? A very attractive recent hypothesis would make her one of the beauties of her own time, a very clever lady known as a prankster at court, nicknamed the Butterfly. She was depicted by the most celebrated artists of her time, including Sir Anthony van Dyck. But what's Ephelia's connection to the Stuart court? Or to butterflies? And what does her work say about the turbulent world she lived in? Stick around to find out. This video has everything: political intrigue, a dashing prince of the civil wars, and even a rumored duel between women rivals. Hello, lovely history fans. I'm Dr. Julia Martins, and I'm a historian, and this is Pancake. Now, I love sharing interesting research with you, from how people gave birth in the past, to what they ate, read, and what they believed in. If you're new here, welcome to Living History, where I talk about history and culture. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I also have a Patreon, so if you would like to support my work and help me keep on making history videos, then please consider becoming a patron. Now, before we start exploring the legendary Ephelia, my thanks to Dr. Maureen E. Mulvihill at the Princeton Research Forum stateside, whose research inspired and informed this video. She is the scholar who introduced an exciting new hypothesis for Ephelia's identity. You're going to hear a lot about that here. So, thank you, Maureen. And if you are intrigued, then make sure you check out the references in the description of the video below. Now, without further ado, let's try to untangle this literary mystery, shall we? I mean, who doesn't love a famous case in literary detective work? And contrary to the Shakespeare authorship question, so the idea that someone other than Shakespeare was behind his writings, in Ephelia's case, we are indeed dealing with a truly pseudonymous writer, a dedicated case of concealed authorship. In 17th-century literature, few figures are as mysterious and intriguing as this Ephelia writer, and few writers were as clever or witty. But reclaiming the identity of Ephelia, a lost writer of the Restoration period, and restoring her to her rightful place in the literary canon is no small task. Since the 19th century, scholars and literary enthusiasts have attempted to unmask the woman behind the pseudonym. In the 1990s, all known writings attributed to Ephelia and some new finds were added to the official literary canon by Dr. Mulvihill. And here she is showcasing her rare book collection, which includes a valuable first edition of Ephelia's 1679 poetry book. I am officially very jealous. Anyway, so her research and her two editions of the poet's work in 1992 and 2003, they reopened this exciting, fascinating case, and they inspired new debate about Ephelia's identity. But wait, certainly I should give you a taste of Ephelia's busy pen. Listen to this poem. What is Ephelia talking about? At your entreaty, I at last have writ this whimsy that has nigh nonplussed my wit. The toy I've long enjoyed, if it may be called it in joy, a thing we wish away, but yet no more its character can give than tell the minutes that I have to live. 'Tis a fantastic ill, a loathred disease that can no sex, no age, no person please. Men strive to gain it, but the way they choose to obtain their wish, that and the wish doth lose. Our thoughts are still uneasy till we know what 'tis, and why it is desired so. But the first and happy knowledge that we boast is that we know the valued trifles lost. Thou dull companion of our active ears, that chillst our warm blood with thy frozen fears, how is it likely thou shouldst longest endure, when thought itself thy ruin may procure? Thou short-lived tyrant, that usurpest a sway over womankind, though none thy power obey, except the ill-natured, ugly, peevish, proud, and these indeed thy praises sing aloud. But what's the reason they obey so well? Because they want the power to rebel. But I forget or have my subject lost. Alas, thy being's fancy at the most. Though much desired, 'tis but seldom men caught the vain blessing from a woman's pen. Have you guessed Ephelia's subject? This poem is called Maidenhead, written at the request of a friend. As you might have noticed, it explores the paradoxical idea of virginity in a patriarchal society. Virginity, or maidenhead, is highly prized, but usually fleeting. Ephelia criticizes male vanity and how women were pressured to guard their virginity while men sought to conquer it, and by doing so, diminish its perceived value. Plus, women's curiosity about it could potentially lead to its loss. This is not a romantic, naive poem written by a young woman longing for love, but a sharp critique of her world. It's been written by someone who has experienced life, a worldly and intelligent woman. The poem cleverly upends popular poems at the time about maidenhead, written by men poets, of course, in the so-called libertine tradition. It slyly repurposes this entire genre by making it a female poem, a piece which now fits quite nicely in Ephelia's 1679 book, Female Poems, written by Ephelia. While Ephelia was no cynic, she had a flair for irony. She also wrote a poem about her love for the mysterious J.G. and why she loved him. Now, I won't make you listen to me reading her poetry again, but this exercise in irony is well worth it. And this poem was impressively set to music by the distinguished Dr. Cecil Armstrong Gibbs. And then it was sung and recorded by the English soprano Georgina Cowell, a fellow of the Royal Society of Musicians. Have a listen. How incredible is this? This is no love poem. It's sarcastic. It's an anti-love poem. There was a very popular genre of poetry in the Renaissance in which the poet would catalogue a beloved's finest attributes. Here, though, Ephelia is turning the convention on its head and depicting her lover as a completely undesirable cad. Ephelia's works encompass a wide array of genres, from plays and songs to bold, indeed dangerous political broadsides and proto-feminist poetry. But I promise you, she's always clever, self-aware, and witty. Yet her true identity remained a well-guarded secret of the Restoration era. But what was that world like for a poet like her? So, just a brief recap for context, and I do mean brief. So, the final years of the reign of Charles I were a time of crisis, with the English Civil War, which plunged the country into chaos. And I won't get into the conflict between royalists and parliamentarians here, nor the differences between the First, Second, and Third English Civil Wars. Suffice it to say that when Charles I was executed in 1649, the period later known as the Interregnum began, which lasted 9 years, with England being governed as a republic, not a monarchy. Yes, I realize that I am condensing a lot of big history here, but stick with me. In 1660, the Commonwealth of England was dissolved and the Stuart monarchy was restored with Charles II. This, of course, is the period known as the Restoration. As you can gather from my admittedly simplified recap, this was a time of significant political turmoil, and Ephelia lived and wrote during the volatile times of the 1670s and 80s in London, with the Popish plot, for example, and the Monmouth Rebellion, both subjects of her important political broadsheets. But this was also a time of cultural change. Creative women, writers, actresses, happily benefited from this big transition. Under Charles II, theatres reopened, and professional writers were in high demand. The world of literature and the arts was thriving. For someone interested in women's writing, such as yours truly here, this is an incredible period. This was the time when women writers such as Aphra Behn and, of course, Ephelia started to become more prominent. Aphra Behn deserves her own video, but if you don't know her, she was a poet and a playwright who wrote about controversial social and political subjects in a razor-sharp style, so much like Ephelia. And the work of these early women writers tackles important questions of gender in the heavily male-dominated literary world. There are many connections to be made between these female writers, but perhaps the most important one is just the obstacles that they face to being published. Writing about politics in particular could be dangerous, especially for women. Writers such as Eleanor James and Aphra Behn were arrested for their political writings, and Elizabeth Cellier was even stoned in the pillory. In Behn's case, she wrote critically of the king's illegitimate son, Pretty Jamie, the Duke of Monmouth as he was known. Oh, this was just not wise at all. So both Behn and the actress who delivered Behn's words were arrested. So it's no wonder that Ephelia would choose a pseudonym. Concealed identity avoided the backlash of bold and dangerous writing. An intriguing pseudonym shielded her from legal reprisals, like public humiliation, even imprisonment in the Tower of London. As you'll see, Ephelia was not a fan of the king's illegitimate son, James, the Duke of Monmouth, especially as Ephelia was writing during a time when London was caught up in the chaos of succession conspiracy. The one issue with this anonymity is this: she slipped out of the historical record for a few centuries. Many scholars tried to find her, but no luck, not even a candidate. Still, she was never completely a cold case, Many female scholars have lent strong attention to Ephelia. Germaine Greer, for instance, and her graduate students, they wrote in their Kissing the Rod anthology that even though they hadn't found Ephelia, she was a better poet or a group of poets than she's currently being given credit for. And more recently, Helen Ostowich and Elizabeth Sauer, in their excellent collection Reading Early Modern Women, wrote about her as well. And then there were also the 2 editions of the collected writings with new findings by Maureen Mulvihill, who I mentioned before. But let's get back to the conspiracy I just mentioned. So Ephelia commented in her writings on hot social and political issues, including the Popish plot, an entirely fictitious threat involving the assassination of Charles II by Catholics and the takeover of Anglican England by the Catholic Pope in Rome. Completely wild and unfounded, yet it resulted in a great panic. And there was also the exclusion crisis, which intended to exclude Charles II's brother, James, the heir presumptive to the throne, from the line of succession because he was, you guessed it, a Catholic. And again, I know I'm oversimplifying things, but this was a seriously turbulent period, and I want to get back to Ephelia rather than talk about political history. But we must address a writer's political context, and it bears heavily on Ephelia's body of work. For example, her first publication in 1678 was precisely called A Poem to His Sacred Majesty on the Plot, written by a gentlewoman. It was later published as Ephelia's in her Book of Female Poems in 1679. But, most important of all, this sensitive broadsheet poem, published by the royalist bookseller Henry Brougham, was licensed by Charles II's royal censor, Roger L'Estrange. This is printed at the foot of the broadsheet. Now, certainly, this gentlewoman had high connections. This poem and its author were effectively legitimized. They were permitted a public presence. Ephelia's 1678 poem on the Popish plot was a large-format broadsheet, handsomely printed, and it's likely that it quickly attracted attention. It was addressed directly to Charles II, and it was written by a gentlewoman, clearly a court insider. And it expressed feelings of solidarity and allegiance to the Stuart monarchy, which was shaken by the Popish plot. The poem included a prayer for the king's safety and described the nation's allegiance to him in these terms. Were you, the king, defenseless, they, his subjects, would round you fall and pile their bodies to build a wall. Now, that's true devotion. And if you think that this sounds like an exercise in rhetoric and propaganda, well, you're not wrong. But this poem marked Ephelia's entry into the literary world. Her works were licensed and published by established influential people, indicating a powerful network. Lady Mary Villiers Stuart, the Dowager Duchess of Richmond and Lennox, is identified as Ephelia's patron in Ephelia's Book of Female Poems in 1679. Let's put a pin on Lady Mary, known as the Butterfly. We'll flutter back to her soon. Suffice it to say that by the following year, 1679, Ephelia's lovely book, Female Poems on Several Occasions, written by Ephelia, was printed by William Downing and sold by James Courtney, both respected London bookmen. This was not a case of surreptitious publication. The 1679 collection is our poet's signature work, and it included everything from love poems to reformated political broadsides. The book is just an engaging self-portrait in verse. So we observe her talent in conveying complex experiences and emotions, criticizing the world around her, and as always being witty and irreverent. But we must return to the core question: who was the person behind the name? Identifying Ephelia has been a complex puzzle for several centuries. There's a portrait of a woman in the book, as you can see here, with a very generous cleavage. She's dressed and styled like most women of the court at the time. Take a look at Sir Peter Lely's Windsor Beauties, and you'll see what I mean. And yet, she doesn't seem to be any of these women. This woman conforms to the beauty standards of the time, taking them to extremes even, and yet this portrait seems generic. Plus, it's not signed. But it's perhaps captivating enough to distract the reader from asking who the writer actually is. Certainly, it must be fictitious, and certainly it's an amusing parody of exploitive portraits of women at the time, such as the sexualized and posthumous rendering of the demure Catherine Phillips. Mrs. Phillips was a gold standard of female propriety during her day, and she would never have approved of such an image of herself in her very own book. So for a long time, Ephelia was believed to be a male writer, because of course, how would a great writer not be a man, right? Or a sort of clever cabal of anonymous men and women writers. This idea probably comes from the fact that in the over 60 poems in her book, the 1679 Book of Female Poems, there are just so many different voices and points of view. Was Ephelia a woman of the town, someone from the theatre world, or a member of Afro Band Circle? Her work suggests that she was a highly placed person who had direct and familiar access to kings and queens, dukes and duchesses. She writes to royals and nobles at the Stuart court and to her literary contemporaries and to lovers and enemies of the monarchy. She was clearly well connected. She was a court insider. Scholars have sifted through genealogical records, contemporary references, and physical evidence from surviving copies of her writings, and several hypotheses have been created, such as a certain Joan Phillips, who has never been found, suggesting that this name was entirely fictitious. Two recent editors of Ephelia's verse, Jane Stevenson and Peter Davidson, they concluded in their Feminist anthology that no evidence exists of a literary Joan Phillips in the late 17th century in London. Also suggested was an Anne Proud of Shrewsbury, a member of the literary Milton Proud Phillips line. Most scholars, though unable to find a candidate, have sort of just given up, settling on Ephelia as an inaccessible woman writer about whom not much can ever be known. But the most probable hypothesis, at least in my opinion, is the one developed by the scholar I mentioned earlier, Maureen Mulvihill. She has constructed quite an ingenious and probable case for Ephelia as Lady Mary Villiers, the Duchess of Richmond. Now, if you Google that name, the first result you will probably get is Mary Beaumont, the Countess of Buckingham, who was George Villiers' mother. And George Villiers was the Duke of Buckingham, often referred to as King James I's lover. Plus, he was known for his, terrific gams or legs. Anyway, honestly, just take a look at how pretty he was in this painting by Rubens. So I wouldn't blame James I at all, to be honest. In any case, if this all sounds familiar, perhaps, it's probably because of the TV series Mary and George, which is a fun watch, but is set before Ephelia's time. Plus, it's not exactly a documentary, let's put it that way. Now, so this George Villiers, who was eventually murdered, by the way, and that's a tangent for another time, but he was young Mary Villiers' father. And the widow, Mary's mother, the wealthy heiress, Lady Catherine Manners, then married an Irish Catholic, infuriating the Protestant King Charles I. So he took the 3 children, including Mary, to raise them at the Stuart court in London. So this Mary Villiers would later become the wife of James Stuart, the Duke of Richmond, and that would make her the new Duchess of Richmond and Lennox. And she is our subject here. So Lady Mary was raised as a ward of King Charles I and his French wife, Queen Henrietta Maria, who doted on Mary. Lady Mary was very much a court insider. She was privately educated and known for her wit and charm, not to mention her beauty. And of special interest here, she was a clever prankster, well-versed in the arts of court intrigue. And we know from the Dictionary of National Biographies profile of Mary Villiers by Freda Haas that a French ambassador to the Stuart court judged Mary Villiers as the most delightful and amusing woman in the world. I love that quote. Just to give you an idea, her nickname was Butterfly. This is how the story goes. As a teenager and already a widow from her first marriage to one of the sons of the powerful Earl of Pembroke, Mary played a prank on the king in the royal gardens. She hid away in a large basket or trunk, depending on the version of the story, and when found out, she was promptly called the Butterfly. This amusing episode of Villiers family lore is set out by Madame d'Aulnoy in her court memoirs, published in Paris in 1695. On the title page of Ephelia's female poems, published in 1679, you can see a butterfly-shaped device or vignette placed directly under the poet's pseudonym. It's not the printer's mark, it's serving a whole different purpose. Might this be the author herself, hiding in plain sight? And there's more to this butterfly argument. The name Ephelia may derive from classical sources such as Ephelis, spots in Greek. Could the name be alluding to the dappled pattern on butterfly wings? Or perhaps even to freckles? As some portraits show, Mary was red-haired, and she may have had freckles as a young girl. Who knows? Just very intriguing clues, I'd say. But let's get back to Lady Mary Villiers. She was married very early to Charles Herbert, the son of the Earl of Pembroke. This was a teenage wedding. You can see them here in this powerful painting by Van Dyck of the Herbert family at Wilton House in Wiltshire. The Earl of Pembroke is welcoming Mary into this dynastic family. Charles died quite young though, leaving Mary a young widow herself, but she soon remarried, this time into the royal Stuart line. This new second husband was a cousin to the king, James Stuart, the Duke of Richmond, and later Lennox. James was a key advisor to Charles I during the war, and the couple had 2 children together. Now, it was during their marriage that Mary was rumored to be involved with Prince Rupert of the Rhine, the dashing war hero. After James' death, and it was said that he died of a broken heart after the public beheading of his beloved Stuart kinsman Charles I, Mary married a 3rd time. From all reports, this was not an arranged marriage, but a true love match. She chose the much less prestigious but apparently charming Colonel Thomas Howard of the respected Howard line of English Catholics. Tom Howard was known as a reckless but rehabilitated libertine and duelist. Maybe Mary thought that it was high time for her to really have some fun. Unfortunately for her, though, Thomas also died before her, just like her previous 2 husbands. Her children, Mary and Esme, predeceased her as well. So if Mary was the person behind Ephelia, losing her children and her husband would have meant that she had time in the 1670s and 80s to dedicate herself to writing. She could reinvent herself as a poet and a playwright. She had been a beauty at Charles I's court, she had witnessed the chaos of the wars, and she had been a respected duchess at a later Stuart court, that of Charles II. So she had an insider's knowledge of many personalities and national crises. She had plenty to say. As a widow in the late 1670s, perhaps her time had finally come. Now, there are many clues that connect Mary and Ephelia, and I won't go into all of them here, so make sure you check out the references below if you would like to fall into this rabbit hole yourself. But here are two clues which help make the case, besides the butterfly nickname. For example, Mary Villiers as a sort of lady duelist. As the Baroness Berkeley mentions in her 1903 biography of Mary's brother, Mary was rumored to have duelled a female romantic rival, and a female enemy of Ephelia's is prominently mentioned in Ephelia's poetry book as my rival. Also, the butterfly vignette on the title page of Ephelia's book is flanked by what appear to be swords. Fencing, along with gambling, shooting, and cross-dressing, were all fashionable pastimes among court women. It's likely that the high-spirited Lady Mary would have enjoyed such a diversion. Besides being known as a witty prankster and a court intriguer, she was closely connected to literary circles. Thanks to recent research, we know that she was the dedicatee of writings by Phineas Fletcher, Leonard Whelan, and Francis Lenton. And some of Ephelia's songs in her 1679 poetry book were set to music by court composers, such as Moses Snow, William Turner, John Farmer, and others. This is all new and recent findings, by the way, which is very exciting. But in any case, Mary's personal life, along with her 3 marriages, her rich friendships, her likely affair with Prince Rupert, her penchant for cross-dressing, also mentioned in recent research, all of that points to a fluidity in identity, a privileged and unfettered life, and certainly a rich imagination. In Ephelia's poetry, we can hear this polyvocal persona, a poet who speaks in many different voices. The fact that Lady Mary was well educated, by private tutors of course, would explain much in terms of Ephelia's many genres and writing styles and her literary references. Her closeness to the royal family would explain her political broadsides, advocating for the Stuart monarchy. As a highly placed court insider, Lady Mary could pretty much get away with anything. She had access to everyone and could do, well, whatever she pleased. You may be wondering, did any of Mary's contemporaries associate her with the Ephelia writer? Well, there are some provocative connections. In John Tutchin's 1685 play, The Unfortunate Shepherd, he mentions an Ephelia as a sort of witty city lady with a sharp tongue who enters the pastoral world of the play in disguise. And this Ephelia is of the royal line. Sounds very much like the Lady Mary I have been describing, doesn't it? Other connections could be the poet Anne Finch, Countess of Winchelsea, who wrote in one of her 2 poems to an Ephelia, she wrote, "Me, Ephelia, me you caught with all your powerful influence." Again, it could be Lady Mary. Other writers, such as John Dunton and Ella Riviere Manley, refer to their Ephelias as red-haired. And in her own poetry book, Ephelia describes herself as a kind of a butterfly. This is what she wrote. "Ranging the plain one summer's night, to pass a vacant hour, I fortunately chanced to light on lovely Philip's bow." If Lady Mary was Ephelia, that means that Mary dedicated her 1679 book to herself. And I just love this. I think it's brilliant. It's the perfect cover. Of course, all of this is circumstantial. It's not definitive proof, but the clues do add up. It appears to be very likely that Lady Mary was indeed Ephelia. The more I read while researching for this video, the more I found this hypothesis compelling. I think as a historian, it's both intriguing and frustrating when we're confronted with a case like Ephelia's. All that scholars can do is to try to piece together existing clues, consider a range of primary and secondary sources, and construct the most probable hypothesis. And who knows, maybe one day in the future a letter or someone's journal will be found and we'll know for sure. For now, though, the more I learn about Lady Mary Villiers and the more I read of Ephelia's work, the more I can see them only as the same person. But let's talk a little bit about her writings, shall we? As I mentioned, Ephelia's work was quite varied. As we know from Dr. Mulvihill's 2 editions and the updated ESTC records, the corpus of Ephelia's work to date includes 5 printed writings and 1 manuscript. Here's the list. So, a poem to Charles II on the Popish Plot, 1678. The Poetry Book of Female Poems by Ephelia, 1679, an updated poem to Charles II on the plot the same year, a cautionary broadside poem to the Duke of Monmouth, Advice to His Grace, 1681, I think, and a manuscript elegy signed Ephelia on the death of the art collector and Villiers family associate, Sir Thomas Isham, in the same year. And this is preserved in Nottingham Library's Potlet collection. But there was also a second edition of the 1679 poetry book in 1682, with several unattributed additions, probably an unauthorized edition, explaining the absence of the prominent butterfly device on the title page. The political writings are especially interesting to me, such as her poem To Monmouth, Advice to His Grace. This poem is addressed to the illegitimate son of Charles II, James the Duke of Monmouth. It was prompted by his organized plan to overturn the Stuart succession and get himself crowned King of England, which is quite a bold, cheeky plan for a young bastard. He raised a small ragtag army, but he was captured and then publicly beheaded. In this poem, Ephelia seeks to stop this madness and preempt a public spectacle. She opens her poem with an angry command. She's ordering a Stuart Duke to wise up and accept his proper place. She writes, "Awake, vain man, 'tis time thy abuse to see. Awake and guard thy heedless loyalty. From all the snares are laid for it and thee." Ephelia basically gives the king's illegitimate son a dressing down for trying to become a legitimate heir. She writes, "Tell the base great ones and the shouting throng, you scorn a crown won in another's wrong. Prove your high birth by deeds noble and good, but strive not to legitimate your blood." Yeah, good and blood don't really rhyme anymore, do they? No, if Ephelia was actually Lady Mary Villiers, that means that she grew up around the king, Charles II, so she might have felt like an older auntie of sorts who could reprimand the Duke so sternly and openly and with palpable superiority. Now, let's turn to our poet's feminism. And yes, that's an anachronistic term. We could say proto-feminism, but what I'm emphasizing here is her strong and brave voice, very much a female voice. The gendering of her work alone, using female poems as the title of her major work, is completely fascinating in my view. So Ephelia seems to be consciously distinguishing her voice as a determinedly female voice, completely different from the sound of her male contemporaries. Going back to the poem I started the video with, Maidenhead, the poem about virginity, I find it fascinating that as a female author, she writes in such an assertive, even sexual way, advocating for women. She knows the world of libertines and she's comfortable being a part of the conversation, bringing her feminist voice and her morals to it. And the same could be said for her more known and very public contemporary, Aphra Behn. And while Ephelia clearly had a sense of humor, she was very righteous in her work. Remember how critical she was of the king's illegitimate son. She also wrote a poem, To a Proud Beauty, possibly addressing the king's mistress, who was known for her ravenous, high-handed ways. It begins with strong words. She writes, "Imperious fool." So Ephelia then criticizes the woman for misusing her beauty and sexuality, essentially. And it's also telling that Ephelia writes this, "My fame's as great as yours is." Again, perhaps making the case for Mary Villiers as Ephelia. Ephelia experimented with a range of genres and voices. She wrote plays, love poems, anti-love poems, political commentary, lamentations and songs. She was a versatile, flexible writer, and she was clearly talented. She played with literary genres and conventions, adapting them to her goals and making them female in her own way. She addressed powerful people, mercilessly criticizing them, often in a sarcastic tone. Reading Ephelia, you can feel her confidence in herself and in her place in the world, not to mention her confidence in her own beliefs and her feminism. She upended traditional conventions by adding a clever feminist spin. Ephelia seems proud of who she is, of her identity as a woman. Just listen to her poem To Bajazet, circulating at the time as Ephelia's Lamentation. The poet is voicing an abandoned woman who runs the emotional gamut from sadness and rejection to feminist pride. This woman ends the poem by cursing the man she was so in love with only a few lines earlier. She writes, "I cannot live on pity or respect. A thought so mean would my whole love infect. Less than your love I scorn, sir, to expect. Let me not live in dull indifferency, but give me rage enough to make me die. For if for you I needs must meet my fate, before your pity I would choose your hate." I told you, once you start reading Ephelia, it's hard not to fall in love with her writing. Now, let's talk about her legacy. If you are interested in the history of women's writing, it's very likely that you came across the bold Aphra Behn, who I mentioned several times in this video, and who has become a feminist icon. Ephelia is not nearly as well known. I wonder if things would have been different if she hadn't chosen a pseudonym. But then again, If she was Lady Mary Villiers, how else could she have published her works? In A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf famously wrote, "I would venture to guess that a nun who wrote so many poems without signing them was often a woman." Woolf is alluding to the fact that so much of women's work throughout history has been lost, how anonymous was often a woman. In Ephelia's case, it seems clear that the pseudonymous author was also a woman as well. Yet, while Ephelia played a big part in the literary world and the emergence of women's writing in the late 17th century, opening the way for other female writers and having an impact on them, she was relegated to a footnote in history for a long time, despite her contributions to early modern literature. But that changed when some scholars began to dig, and sometimes with results. Luckily, the question of authorship hasn't prevented feminist scholars from including Ephelia in literary and feminist anthologies, such as Kissing the Rod and Reading Early Modern Women. Now, Ephelia deserves to be a part of the literary canon, and many colleagues I've recently spoken to are grateful that the entire case has a new face. So make sure you visit Maureen Mulvihill's website, Thumbprints of Ephelia, if you want to explore more. You could also check out her online Notes to the Key for suggested identities of the concealed personalities in Ephelia's poetry book. So check out the references below for that. Now, I realize that this video may seem impossibly niche, but the point is that it really isn't, or at least it shouldn't be, not within the larger context of new work on the subject of women's writing. Ephelia should be celebrated along with other writers, male and female. Besides the academic world, Ephelia's work, her way of presenting the late 17th century through a female lens, can be fascinating to so many others too. In her day, Ephelia's poetry was set to music by court composers. It's only fitting that we do the same today and experience something similar to what 17th century courtiers and court composers would have enjoyed. So let's appreciate the work that people like Georgina Colwell and her colleagues did, and how they brought this work back to life. So, may there be more of that. And while the Mary Villiers hypothesis is entirely interesting, scholars can only do so much with the sources that survive. And that's where literature comes in. I think it was the wonderful novelist Kate Moss who said, "Fiction takes over when history runs out." Isn't that the best way of thinking of historical novels? I'm such a fan of Kate Moss's. But if you like historical fiction, and if you were left intrigued by Ephelia, you'll be happy to know that the entire subject has inspired 3 historical novels. So yeah, 3! There are 2 butterfly novels by Leslie J. Nichol, and then Cheryl Sawyer's Winter Prince, on the short-lived romance of Mary Villiers and Prince Rupert. The butterfly books explore Mary Villiers' life, loves, political intrigues, and the dangerous world of 17th century England. Personally, though, I recommend The Winter Prince even more, and I dare you to read it and not fall in love with Prince Rupert, who was very much the Clark Gable of the Restoration. And also Mary Villiers, she's just incredible, honestly. I'm not a big romance reader myself, but Sawyer's The Winter Prince is just a beautiful book about a beautiful story, a sad story, but not without some happy moments. So lastly, as we're thinking of Ephelia's legacy, let me leave you with this image. This English butterfly, an orange tip, was found by Dr. John Hapner of the Magaya Center for Butterfly and Moth Research at the University of Florida. It's now called Ephelia's orange tip, after the ginger-haired Lady Mary Villiers. Now, how cool is that? Now, much more could be said here, but I think I've given you a fair picture. If you're still with me after this very long video, thank you. I do hope I've inspired you to explore Ephelia's poetry. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you can, please join my community on Patreon and support my work making history videos. Let me know your thoughts on Ephelia in the comments. I'm really curious to see what you think. So thank you, and see you next time.